Um, this is some deep stuff for this deep dive.
Yeah. Definitely not your typical self-help stuff.
Right. Like it's raw and honest. You can tell this person is really wrestling with some big questions about, spirituality and self-discovery and meaning.
It's refreshing, actually.
Totally. And a thing that struck me right off the bat was this idea of constant inner transformation.
Mm-hmm.
Like this person sees it as a daily battle almost.
A battle.
Yeah, listen to this. As I constantly wage war on my old self, I transform into the dream of grace.
Interesting. It's funny how we often talk about personal growth as this kind of linear process, like we're always striving to become a better version of ourselves.
Right.
But this takes it a step further.
Yeah. It's intense. Hold on, I highlighted it. Parabellum. If it is peace you wish for, then prepare for war. War in the innermost being purifies the peace at the edges. Whoa!
That's a powerful imagery.
Right. So what do you think they mean by that? Like, is
Mm.
true inner peace about more than just, positive thinking and affirmations?
I think so. It reminds me of the concept of shadow work in psychology.
Shadow work. I've heard that term, but
Yeah, so basically it's the idea that we all have these parts of ourselves that we'd rather not look at.
Yeah.
Our fears, our insecurities, the stuff we try to hide from ourselves and others.
okay.
And shadow work is about bringing those things into the light, confronting them head on.
Even though it can be uncomfortable.
Exactly. Because here's the thing, when we try to suppress those parts of ourselves, they don't just go away.
Yeah.
They fester. They create all sorts of problems in our lives.
So it's like that old saying, what we resist persists.
Exactly. And it's only by acknowledging and integrating their shadow parts of ourselves that we can truly find wholeness and peace.
It's like we have to make friends with our demons instead of trying to banish them.
I love that analogy because it really is about befriending those parts of ourselves, integrating them into the wholeness of who we are.
And maybe through that process, we develop more compassion, not just for ourselves, but for others too.
Exactly.
So we've talked about this inner battle, but these reflections also point to how much external forces can influence our internal world.
It's true. We're shaped by so many things outside of ourselves.
Yeah, like there's this really interesting part where they reinterpret the Lord's Prayer.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's less about asking for things and more about aligning ourselves with a larger purpose. Here's how it goes. Fill us with your creativity so that we may be empowered to bear the fruit of your mission.
That's beautiful. It speaks to a sense of co-creation.
Right. It's like we're being invited to participate in something bigger than ourselves,
And that we have a role to play in shaping our own reality.
and that our creativity is a gift that can be used to fulfill a larger purpose.
Yes.
It's funny how we can go from talking about co-creating with the divine 1 minute to feeling totally stuck in our own heads the next.
Right. It's like this constant push and pull between the vastness of the universe and the very real limitations of our own minds.
Totally. And speaking of feeling stuck, there's this whole section in these reflections about mind traps.
Ah, yes, the mind traps.
Like this one, ego in the mind is a small, dark room. You need to come out for some fresh air and light once in a while.
Oh.
It's such a vivid image.
It is, isn't it? And I think we all have those rooms in our minds to some degree.
Right, like those little boxes we put ourselves in.
Exactly. And sometimes we don't even realize we're in those boxes until something forces us to confront those walls.
And it's not just that we get trapped in our own heads, right? Like these reflections also talk about how external forces can shape our self-concept from the very beginning.
Absolutely. It's like we're born into these pre-existing systems and structures that influence our beliefs and values from a very young age.
Totally. Like, listen to this. The main existential question is, who was responsible for deciding your self-concept? Then it lists all these potential culprits. Government, church, family, brands. It's like we're all just products of our programming in some way.
It makes you wonder how much agency we actually have, right? Like how much of who we are is truly our own making versus what's been imposed upon us.
Right. So how do we even begin to untangle that? Like, how do we break free from those limiting beliefs and stories that we've internalized over a lifetime?
Well, I think it starts with awareness. Just noticing those moments when you're reacting to a situation based on an old, ingrained belief, rather than responding from a place of true authenticity.
So becoming more conscious of our unconscious patterns.
Exactly. And then asking ourselves some tough questions like, does this belief serve me? Does it align with my values? Or is it something I've adopted out of fear, obligation, or a desire to fit in?
Oh, that's good. Yeah. It's like we have to become detectives of our own minds, constantly questioning our assumptions and digging deeper to uncover the truth of who we are.
It's a lifelong journey, for sure.
And speaking of journeys, these reflections also talk about different energy planes that influence our state of being. Have you ever heard of the terms tamas, rajas, and sattva?
Yeah, I've come across those terms in my studies. They come from yoga philosophy and Ayurveda.
Right. So tell me more about them. Like, what do they represent?
Okay, so imagine a spectrum of energy. Tamas is at one end representing inertia, heaviness, darkness. Think procrastination, stagnation, a lack of motivation.
Ugh, I've been there.
Yeah.
Not a great place to be.
Not exactly, but it's important to remember that Tamas is a natural part of the cycle. Just like everything else, it has its purpose.
Okay, so what about the other end of the spectrum?
That's where Sattva resides. It's associated with clarity, peace, harmony, a sense of lightness and expansiveness. Think meditation, being in nature, connecting with your higher self.
Sounds blissful. And what about the middle ground?
That would be Rajas. The energy of action, passion movement. It's the driving force that pushes us to achieve, create, and experience the world. But like anything else, too much, Rajas can lead to burnout and imbalance.
So it's all about finding that sweet spot, that balance between the three.
Exactly. And these reflections seem to suggest that cultivating more sattva in our lives can lead to greater peace and fulfillment.
So if we want more peace and fulfillment, sattva sounds like the way to go.
Yeah, right. But how do we actually get there? Like, how do we cultivate more sattva in our lives, especially when it feels like the world is constantly trying to pull us in a million different directions?
It's the million-dollar question for sure.
Right. And these reflections, they don't pretend to have all the answers,
Yeah.
but they do point to some ancient practices that can help us shift our energy and experience more moments of stillness amidst the chaos.
Okay, so spill the ancient wisdom. What are we talking about here?
Well, meditation is a big one. It's been practiced for centuries across various cultures and traditions as a way to cultivate inner peace and clarity.
Meditation. Okay, I've dabbled in it, but I'll be honest, I always struggle to quiet my mind. You know, like my to-do list just starts running through my head, or I get distracted by a sound or whatever.
It's so common. It's not about emptying your mind completely, though. It's more about becoming aware of those thoughts without getting carried away by them.
Okay, so more about observing those thoughts rather than getting all tangled up in them.
Exactly. And there's also mindfulness, which is about bringing that same quality of present moment awareness to everyday activities.
Okay, so like what? Give me some examples.
It could be as simple as savoring each bite of food when you eat, paying attention to the sensations of your body when you walk, noticing the breath as you go about your day. It's about really being present in your body and in the moment, rather than letting your mind race ahead to the next thing.
I like that. It's like choosing to slow down and really inhabit our experience instead of always rushing to the next thing, which is so easy to do in our culture.
It's so easy, but when we can slow down and be present, we create space for more peace and joy in our lives,
And maybe even a little more sattva.
maybe even a little more sattva.
Yeah.
And speaking of finding that alignment, that sense of being in the flow, these reflections also talk about Dharma.
Yes. Dharma, I love that concept. So how do they describe it?
They talk about it as living a life that feels inherently right and meaningful, like aligning with our unique purpose.
Okay, so not so much about inventing a purpose for ourselves, but more about discovering the purpose that's already within us.
Exactly. It's like our Dharma is a seed that's already planted. We don't need to create it, but we do need to nurture it, cultivate it, and create the conditions for it to blossom.
So how do we do that? How do we figure out what our Dharma is?
Well, it starts with asking ourselves some important questions, like what feels inherently meaningful to me? What brings me joy even in the midst of challenges? What kind of impact do I want to have on the world?
I love those questions. It's like a roadmap for aligning our actions with our deepest values.
Exactly. It's about getting clear on what matters most to us and then having the courage to build our lives around those things.
And speaking of courage, these reflections also mention something called the surrender experiment, which sounds a little counterintuitive. Like, how do we surrender to life while also actively pursuing our purpose?
It's a great question. And I think it gets at the heart of this dance between effort and surrender, intention and letting go.
Okay, so it's not about being passive.
Not at all. It's about recognizing that we don't always have control over the outcome, that sometimes the path unfolds in ways we couldn't have predicted.
So it's more about trusting the process, even when things get messy or uncertain.
Trusting the process and trusting that there's a larger intelligence at work, even when we can't see the whole picture.
Which can be scary.
For sure. But it's also incredibly liberating because it frees us from the need to control everything, to have all the answers.
I like that. And it makes me think about another line from these reflections. The unknown is often viewed as a large shadow filled with only impending doom and danger, What if the understanding of equal potential presents itself?
So good, right? Because the unknown isn't inherently good or bad. It just is. It's full of possibilities, both positive and negative.
It's how we choose to relate to the unknown that makes all the difference.
Exactly. And that brings us to one final concept I want to touch on, the Rasta superpower.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Lay it on me. What's the Rasta superpower?
It's described as the ability to remain centered amidst chaos, to cultivate inner peace while engaging dynamically with the world.
So basically being cool as a cucumber no matter what life throws your way.
You could say that, but it's
Yeah.
more than just being calm on the surface. It's about cultivating a deep sense of inner stillness that allows us to weather any storm.
That makes sense, because we all know people who seem to have this unshakable inner peace, like nothing phases them.
Exactly. And it's not that they don't experience challenges or difficulties. It's that they've learned to meet those challenges from a place of grounded awareness rather than reacting from a place of fear or overwhelm.
It's like they've tapped into some inner reservoir of strength and resilience that most of us have forgotten about.
You know, these reflections, they actually say that everyone is born with this magic. We are just taught to forget it.
It's true, like we come pre-wired for wisdom, peace, and joy. But somewhere along the way, we start to believe that happiness is something we need to achieve or earn, rather than something we already are.
It's the human condition, right? We make things so much more complicated than they need to be.
For sure. Well, on that note, I think this has been an incredible deep dive. We've covered so much ground today, from shadow work to sattva to the Rasta superpower.
It's been quite a journey, and I hope our listeners are walking away with some new insights and practices to explore on their own journeys of self-discovery.
Me too. And I love how these reflections leave us with this final provocative thought. But what if the experience could never be one thing? What if the experience needs both elements, the way a coin needs two sides to buy? So good, right? Like, maybe it's not about choosing one way of being over another, but about embracing the full spectrum of human experience.
The good, the bad, and everything in between.
Exactly. Because ultimately, life is about balance. It's about finding that sweet spot between effort and surrender, between striving for something more and accepting ourselves exactly as we are.
And maybe that's where the real magic lies.
Maybe so. Well, on that note, this has been another fascinating deep dive. Thanks for joining me, and we'll see you next time.
It's been a pleasure.